The Legends of the Fairy Tale Opera House. In a faraway kingdom, nestled within the heart of a mist-clad valley, stood the legendary Opera House of Ilindra. It was a building of almost mystical beauty, a grand structure of alabaster stone, gilded arches, and stained glass windows that shimmered like the northern lights at dusk. Locals spoke of it in whispers, calling it the Fairy Tale Opera House. Some said it was built by magic, a gift from the Fee themselves, while others insisted it was the work of master artisans long forgotten. But everyone agreed on one thing: the opera house was as ancient as it was haunted. The ghosts of the opera hall were known far and wide. They were said to be spirits of former performers, trapped within the walls of the Grand Theatre, cursed to relive their greatest performances for eternity. It was rumored that when the wind blew just right, one could hear the faint echoes of voices singing from within the deserted halls, a haunting melody that tugged at the heartstrings of those who listened too long. The Curse and the Phantom Cast. Long ago, the opera house was the center of culture and life for the kingdom. Its marble steps saw emperors, kings, and queens, as well as the greatest musicians, composers, and actors of their time. But its golden age came to an abrupt and tragic end one fateful night. It was the final performance of the celebrated diva, Ilaria Nightingale, whose voice was said to be the most beautiful in all the realms. Her last aria was to be her farewell to the stage before retiring to a quiet life. That night, under the glow of 1,000 lanterns, Ilaria performed her masterpiece, a ballad of love and sorrow. But as her voice reached its highest, most ethereal note, a terrible accident befell her. A chandelier, vast and heavy, crashed from the ceiling, and in a flurry of glass, metal, and light, Ilaria was gone. Her final note echoed through the hall, lingering long after the crowd had fled in panic. In the days that followed, the opera house was closed, boarded up, and left to rot. But the ghosts of that tragic night remained. For centuries, no one dared step foot inside the opera house. The rumors persisted of strange lights in its windows and the sound of phantom orchestras playing in the dead of night. And yet, stories also circulated about a phantom cast, an ensemble of spirits, led by the ghost of Ilaria herself, cursed to perform the same opera endlessly, unable to rest until their audience returned. The heroes of the opera house. Generations passed, and the opera house became little more than a cautionary tale, its golden days lost to memory. But legends have a way of calling to the brave, the curious, and the foolish alike. Seraphine Vale was a renowned adventurer, known across the kingdom as the seeker of forgotten places. Her hair was the color of burnished copper, and her eyes held the cool green of forest leaves. She was driven not by riches but by the allure of unraveling mysteries. And the greatest mystery in all the land was the Opera House of Ilindra. Despite warnings from locals and friends alike, Seraphine embarked on a journey to the Forgotten Valley, determined to learn the truth about the haunted halls. Armed with only her sword, a lantern, and her unwavering will, she arrived at the gates of the opera house on the eve of the winter solstice, the night when the veil between the living and the dead was said to be at its thinnest. The air around the building was thick with fog, and the cold seemed to seep into her very bones. But Seraphine was undeterred. She pushed open the heavy, creaking doors and stepped inside. The grand foyer was covered in dust, its once golden chandeliers dull and rusted. The velvet curtains had long since faded, and the air smelled of old wood and forgotten times. But even in its decay, the opera house retained a strange beauty, a haunting elegance that stirred something deep within Seraphine. She made her way to the heart of the building, the great opera hall. There, she saw the stage, bathed in the pale moonlight that streamed through the cracked windows. And as she stepped closer, she heard it, the faint sound of music, ethereal and distant, like a dream just out of reach. Suddenly, the hall was no longer empty. Figures dressed in costumes of old appeared, shimmering like mist. They were the phantom cast, performing their endless opera. At the center stood Illyria, her spectral figure as graceful and tragic as the stories had told. Her voice, even in death, was as mesmerizing as it had been in life. Illyria's eyes met Seraphine's, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then, with a voice as soft as the wind, Illyria spoke. "We are bound by the curse of the last aria," she said. "To perform until an audience worthy of our song can set us free. Will you stay and listen?" The performance of redemption. Seraphine, though unnerved, had always been one to honor the old ways. She took a seat in the front row, her heart pounding in her chest. The music swelled, and the opera began. It was the most beautiful, heartbreaking performance she had ever witnessed. Every note was a plea, every word a cry for release. The phantom orchestra played with a passion that transcended the grave, and Illyria's voice filled the hall, rising and falling like the tides. As the final note of the opera rang out, Seraphine stood, tears in her eyes. The air around her shimmered, and the ghostly figures began to fade. Illyria approached her, a sad but grateful smile on her lips. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have freed us." And with that, the ghosts of the opera house vanished, leaving only silence in their wake. The legacy of the opera house. Seraphine Vale returned to her village with tales of the opera house and its tragic inhabitants, but few believed her. Yet, when she led them to the once decaying building, they found it transformed. The opera house stood restored to its former glory, its halls no longer haunted but alive with light and song once more. The people of the kingdom began to return, filling its seats with new audiences. And though no one ever saw the phantom cast again, the legend of the fairy tale opera house lived on. But Seraphine knew the truth, that the souls of Illyria and her cast had found peace, their final aria sung to one who was worthy. And somewhere in the echoes of the music that now filled the opera house, if one listened closely, they might still hear the faintest trace of the ghosts who once dwelled there. And so, the opera house stood not just as a place of beauty and art, but as a reminder of the power of stories, the weight of curses, and the courage of those who dared to uncover the secrets hidden in forgotten places. The return to the opera house. Years had passed since Seraphine Vale had freed the cursed spirits of the opera house. She had gone on to live a quiet life, content in the knowledge that her adventure had brought peace to those lost souls. But the opera house of Illyria was not finished with her, nor with the kingdom. A growing darkness began to spread across the land. It started with strange occurrences in the nearby villages. People claimed to see figures in the mist, shadows that disappeared when approached. Children whispered of songs carried on the wind, voices that tugged at their dreams. The river that flowed near the opera house began to run colder and swifter than it should, and the moon seemed dimmer in the sky. The villagers grew uneasy, and rumors spread quickly. Some said that the ghosts had returned, angry at being disturbed. Others believed that something far worse had taken up residence in the opera house. Whatever it was, the once restored building now stood empty again, its lights extinguished and its windows dark. When the villagers asked Seraphine to investigate, she hesitated. She had given her heart and soul to freeing the spirits, and she had no desire to return to that haunted place. But as the weeks passed, and the dark presence grew stronger, she knew she had no choice. She gathered her sword, her lantern, and her courage once more, and set off for the valley. This time, however, she was not alone. The company of heroes. Word of Sraffin's journey spread quickly, and soon a band of adventurers joined her. Each of them had their own reason for answering the call, but they were united by a shared sense of duty and a curiosity that could not be quenched. Lyra the Midge, a young woman with silver hair and eyes that sparkled with arcane energy, was a master of the forgotten arts of magic. She had studied under the greatest wizards of the age, but her true passion lay in unraveling the mysteries of the world. The opera house, with its history of curses and phantoms, fascinated her, and she saw this journey as an opportunity to uncover the magic that still lingered within its walls. Thorn Ironheart, a knight of the Iron Guard, was a man of few words and unshakable loyalty. His armor, polished to a gleaming silver, hid the scars of 100 battles, and his great sword was said to be able to cut through both flesh and spirit. Thorn had once fought alongside Sraffin in her younger days, and when he heard that she was returning to the opera house, he swore to protect her with his life. Rook, a rogue with a quick smile and quicker hands, had no love for haunted places, but he did love treasure. He had heard rumors that beneath the opera house lay vaults filled with untold riches, and while he wasn't one to believe in ghosts, he was more than willing to risk a few sleepless nights if it meant finding gold. Talia Nightingale, a distant descendant of Illyria, the tragic diva, had been raised on stories of her ancestors' brilliance. She was a bard, her voice nearly as beautiful as Illyria's had been, and her lute could weave magic into the very air. Talia had always felt a connection to her ancestor, but she had never expected to face the opera house's mysteries herself. When she heard the call for heroes, she knew her place was among them. Together, the four of them journeyed with Sraffin to the opera house, their hearts heavy with the weight of the unknown. The darkness unveiled. The opera house loomed ahead, its grand facade marred by the creeping vines that had overtaken its once pristine stone. As the adventurers approached, the air grew thick with tension. The fog that clung to the valley seemed alive, whispering secrets that none of them could decipher. "Stay close," Sraffin warned, her voice steady but low. "Something is watching us." The others nodded, their eyes scanning the shadows. Even Thorn, with his steel nerves, felt the weight of unseen eyes upon them. They reached the entrance and pushed open the great doors, which groaned in protest. Inside, the opera house was as dark and cold as the last time Sraffin had been there, but something had changed. The air felt heavy, oppressive, as if the very walls were watching them. They moved cautiously through the foyer and into the great opera hall. It was there that they first saw it, the throne of shadows. At the center of the stage, where once Illyria had sung her final aria, now sat a great black throne. It was made of twisted, jagged metal, and from its surface oozed a darkness that seemed to consume the very light around it. Upon the throne sat a figure, cloaked in shadow, its eyes glowing a deep, malevolent red. "Who dares to enter my domain?" the figure hissed, its voice like the rustling of dead leaves. Sraffin stepped forward, her hand on the hilt of her sword. "I am Sraffin Vale. This house was freed from its curse. Who are you to claim it now?" The figure chuckled, a sound that sent chills through the air. "Foolish mortal. The spirits may be gone, but the magic of this place runs deep. I am the Lord of Shadows, and this opera house is mine now." Lyra's eyes narrowed as she whispered to Sraffin, "He's feeding off the magic of the building. It's not just haunted anymore, it's corrupted." The Lord of Shadows stood, his form shifting and growing until he towered over them. "You will leave now, or join the spirits that linger here for eternity." "Not a chance," Thorn growled, stepping forward with his sword raised. But before he could strike, the figure raised a hand, and the shadows came alive. Tendrils of darkness snaked out from the throne, wrapping around the adventurers, pulling them toward the stage. The battle for the opera house. Lyra raised her hands, her fingers crackling with arcane energy. "Not today, Shadow Lord!" she shouted, sending a bolt of lightning into the darkness. It sliced through the tendrils, freeing Seraphine and the others. The hall erupted into chaos. Thorn charged forward, his great sword glowing with the power of his ancestors. He swung at the Lord of Shadows, but his blade passed through the figure as though it were made of smoke. Rook darted around the edges of the battle, his keen eyes searching for a weakness. "This thing's not fully in our world," he shouted. "We need to bring it here, or we can't hurt it." Talia, her heart pounding, strummed her lute and began to sing. Her voice rose, clear and strong, weaving a spell of light and protection. As her song filled the hall, the shadows recoiled, and the Lord of Shadows let out a hiss of pain. "Keep singing," Seraphine called as she leaped onto the stage, her sword flashing in the dim light. "We need to force him into the light." Talia's song grew louder, and the magic in her voice began to unravel the darkness that surrounded the Lord of Shadows. The figure flickered, its form becoming more solid as the light of Talia's music cut through the shadows. With a roar, Thorn swung his sword again, this time connecting with the Shadow Lord's flesh. The figure let out a scream, and the darkness around him exploded, sending the adventurers flying back. But Seraphine was ready. She rose to her feet, her eyes blazing with determination. She charged forward, her sword raised high, and with a single, powerful strike, she drove the blade through the heart of the Lord of Shadows. The figure let out one final scream before it dissolved into mist, and the darkness that had plagued the opera house began to lift. A new dawn. When the dust settled, the opera house was silent once more. The throne of shadows was gone, and the oppressive weight that had filled the hall had vanished. The adventurers stood together, bruised and battered but victorious. "It's over," Seraphine said, her voice barely a whisper. Lyra nodded, though her eyes still scanned the shadows warily. "For now. But this place, it's ancient. There's more here than just ghosts." Talia, her lute in hand, looked toward the stage where her ancestor had once sung. "Illyria may be at peace, but the magic of the opera house will always call to those who seek it." Seraphine turned to her companions, a small smile on her face. "Then we'll be ready. If this place needs protecting, we'll protect it." And so, the opera house of Illyria stood once more, not as a haunted ruin, but as a place of legend, where heroes fought not just for their kingdom, but for the very soul of the land. The secrets beneath the stage. The victory over the Lord of Shadows brought a new sense of peace to the opera house, but it was a fragile peace, one that the people of the kingdom felt could shatter at any moment. Seraphine and her companions became the unofficial guardians of the opera house, watching over it and ensuring no dark forces dared return. However, it wasn't long before strange occurrences began anew, whispers in the night, unseen eyes watching from the shadows, and a constant hum of energy that pulsed beneath the surface. Seraphine knew that something remained within the opera house, something far older than the spirits of Illyria Nightingale and her phantom cast. There was an unspoken truth that no one had uncovered, a deeper mystery tied to the very foundations of the building. The magic that had once bound the spirits and empowered the Lord of Shadows came from somewhere, and if it wasn't defeated at its source, it would continue to manifest in ever darker forms. One evening, while Seraphine stood in the great opera hall, gazing at the stage where the last battle had taken place, she felt a soft pull in her mind, like a thread tugging at her subconscious. She looked down at the floor beneath the stage, where the boards were uneven and weathered, and she suddenly knew what she needed to do. "We've only scratched the surface," she whispered to herself. "There's something deeper." The hidden catacombs. The following morning, Seraphine gathered her companions once more. Lyra, Thorn, Rook, and Talia joined her in the great opera hall, each of them sensing that something important was about to happen. Seraphine had explained her suspicions. Beneath the opera house, buried deep under the stage, lay a hidden place, a place that had been sealed away for centuries. The strange events they had experienced since the fall of the Lord of Shadows suggested that whatever lay down there was stirring once more. "We need to go beneath the stage," Seraphine said, her voice resolute. "There's something down there, something that holds the key to all of this." Rook, ever the skeptic, crossed his arms. "You're saying there's some secret tunnel under the opera house that's been there this whole time? And no one's ever found it?" Talia, strumming her lute absently, smiled at him. "This place is full of secrets, Rook. Why should this surprise you?" Seraphine nodded. "We've been fighting the surface symptoms, but the source of the magic has always been deeper. We'll find the truth down there." With the decision made, the group descended into the underbelly of the opera house. They navigated narrow staircases and forgotten halls until they reached the trapdoor hidden at the far end of the basement. Its edges were lined with old, intricate symbols that shimmered faintly in the dim light. As Lyra examined the carvings, her eyes widened. "This isn't just a trapdoor," she whispered. "It's a seal. A magical barrier. Whatever's down there was locked away for a reason." Thorn's hand rested on his sword hilt. "Then we'll need to be ready for whatever we find." With a nod from Seraphine, Lyra began to unravel the enchantment. The air around them grew colder as the seal was broken, and a low, mournful wail echoed from below. The trapdoor creaked open, revealing a stone stairway that led down into the darkness. The heart of the opera house. The adventurers descended into the catacombs, their torches casting long shadows on the damp stone walls. The further they went, the heavier the air became, thick with magic and the lingering essence of something ancient. Strange symbols and carvings adorned the walls, telling the story of the opera house's creation, a story that none of them had ever heard before. "This isn't just a theater," Lyra murmured, tracing her fingers over one of the carvings. "This place was built on something much older. The opera house was a facade, a way to hide whatever lies beneath." As they ventured deeper, they began to hear the faint sounds of music, but it was distorted, eerie, as though played on instruments long forgotten. It grew louder with each step, and soon the stone stairway opened up into a massive underground chamber, a vast, circular hall with a ceiling that seemed to stretch into the abyss. In the center of the chamber stood a towering structure, an ancient obelisk made of dark stone, pulsating with a faint, otherworldly light. Surrounding it were what appeared to be the remnants of an ancient ritual, broken statues, scattered offerings, and the skeletal remains of figures long dead. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. This is a power source," she said, her voice trembling. "The opera house was built over this to contain its energy. This is where the magic comes from." The others stared in awe and trepidation at the obelisk, feeling its dark energy seep into their bones. Seraphine's mind raced. The Lord of Shadows must have drawn his power from this. But what is it? And why was it hidden? Suddenly, the music stopped, and a deep, rumbling voice echoed through the chamber. "You should not have come here." The awakening of the conductor. From the shadows of the chamber, a figure stepped forward. He was tall and skeletal, his form draped in tattered robes of ancient design. His face was hidden beneath the hood, but his eyes burned with a cold, silver light. In his hand, he held a baton, long and made of obsidian, with veins of magic pulsing through it. He was the conductor, the being who had orchestrated the power within the obelisk for millennia. "You have disrupted the harmony," the conductor said, his voice filled with both sorrow and fury. "For centuries, this place has existed in balance, but now you have awoken the music of chaos." Thorn stepped forward, his sword at the ready. "We didn't come here to start a war. We came to stop whatever evil is brewing in this place." The conductor tilted his head, as if considering Thorn's words. "This is not evil, mortal. This is the music of creation itself, the source of all magic in your world. It is neither good nor evil, it simply is. But you meddled with it. The seal was broken. And now it will break free." With a swift motion, the conductor raised his baton, and the chamber came alive with the sound of 1,000 instruments, all playing at once in a cacophony of overwhelming force. The very ground beneath them trembled, and from the darkness, figures began to emerge, phantom musicians, their bodies twisted and misshapen, their instruments glowing with the same dark energy as the obelisk. "This is what you've unleashed," the conductor said, his voice growing louder. "You cannot stop it. The music will consume you." Seraphine gritted her teeth and drew her sword. "We won't let it." The Battle of the Catacombs. The chamber erupted into chaos as the phantom musicians swarmed the adventurers. Their melodies were weapons, their music twisting the air into cutting blades and waves of force. Lyra conjured shields of magic to protect her companions, but the relentless sound pressed in from all sides. Rook ducked and dodged through the onslaught, using his agility to slip past the spectral figures and strike at their instruments, shattering them with his daggers. Thorn stood like a bulwark in the center of the fray, his great sword glowing with holy light as he cut through the phantoms. Talia, her heart pounding, raised her lute and began to play a counter-melody, weaving her magic into the air to disrupt the phantom orchestra. Her song was a song of hope, of defiance, and slowly, she began to turn the tide of the battle. But the conductor was relentless. He raised his baton again, and the obelisk pulsed with dark energy, sending waves of raw power through the chamber. Seraphine staggered under the force, but she kept her focus on the conductor. "This ends now," she shouted, charging toward him. The conductor's silver eyes gleamed as he raised his baton to strike her down, but in that moment, Talia's song reached its peak. Her music collided with the conductor's, and for a brief instant, the chamber was filled with a perfect harmony. Seraphine seized the moment. With a final, powerful strike, she drove her sword through the conductor's chest. The dark music stopped, and the phantom musicians vanished into the air. The conductor collapsed to the ground, his baton clattering to the stone floor. As his form began to fade, he looked up at Seraphine, his voice a whisper. "You have silenced the music. But it will return. It always does." With that, the conductor dissolved into nothingness, leaving only silence in the chamber. A new legacy. The battle was over, but the adventurers knew that the power of the obelisk was still there, deep beneath the opera house. The ancient source of magic would never truly be gone, but for now, it was contained once more. Seraphine and her companions sealed the catacombs again, this time with new wards, stronger and more attuned to the nature of the magic within. The opera house would continue to stand, a place of beauty and mystery, but now it was also a place guarded by those who knew its secrets. Talia, standing on the stage where her ancestor once sang, smiled softly. "Maybe one day, this place will be known for more than its ghosts." Seraphine looked at her friends, each of them now tied to the opera house in ways they hadn't expected. "We'll make sure of it." And so, the legends of the opera house continued to grow, but now they were not just tales of ghosts and curses, they were stories of heroes who faced the music and prevailed.